Hello and welcome to the California Wealth Warriors podcast with your host, Ray Olmo. Ray single-handedly dedicated to keeping the people who want to stay in California and financially whole. Ray, good to see you again, my friend.
Oh no, it's Mr.
Oh,
Bill.
no, not
We were
more
just talking about
taxes.
Saturday Night Live. They had that little play guy. You remind me of him. He gets crushed by tractors and stuff like that all the time.
Not more taxes, Ray. No,
Yeah.
no.
No, we're gonna turn Mr. Bill into a Goliath. Hey, thanks for being with me as always, Bill. You're a great partner in this, trying to reach our objective, even though you're not planted into the dirt of California.
No, I abandoned the dirt of California. I'm ashamed to admit to the audience. I once
Yeah.
was there, but left.
Yeah. So I was at the I was at the ranch this weekend. And I have a fraternity brother from Chico that is a retired federal marshal, and we were up there and we were training some kids that were going to be going to the Secret Service for
Nice.
our government. And he was pretty serious training, man. It was it was really a lot of fun, and it was just a god beautiful day. And they just looked at the property and just we're sitting there with the cows and the horses. And I'll tell you what, you know, California cowboying is a pretty cool thing.
Oh,
So
it's a beautiful
and
thing.
I wouldn't give it up for anything. And so let's jump into this. We've got a ton to cover today, and it's going to be impossible to do this. And the friend I have on today has become a really good friend of mine, James Cunningham with Cunningham Legal. And just to show you, or to tell you how good friends we are, he and his lovely wife, Lori, and joined my wife, Yvette, and I for my birthday last year. And so we've really palled up. We met through Vistage, right, Jim?
Yeah.
Okay. And so we're gonna just hammer through this today because I revere you as probably the top California estate planning attorney in the state. Your peers also revere you, and you're a businessman more than you are an attorney. And so you cover a lot of ground, and you are on the same mission. So again, James Cunningham with Cunningham Legal, welcome to the California Wealth Warrior podcast, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ray. And
Yeah.
Bill.
Yeah. And so Jim is, as I was telling Bill, Jim is a marketing monster. And the reason is because he has to cover a lot of ground. I'm kind of one of those guys that I'm kind of in the shadows picking, finding the gold nuggets of clients. But Jim's services really apply to every single Californian. Okay. And he again is California centric. So Jim, let's do this.
Yeah.
Let's over what I've been doing with California Wealth Warriors is trying to outline the mission. And you have over a dozen offices in California now, and you've been kind of gobbling these up and spreading and trying to get your tentacles out. What is your mission for Cunningham Legal for California?
Well, our mission is to help the mass affluent increase their wealth and transfer it to the next generation, paying the least income tax, estate tax, death tax, generation skipping transfer tax, capital gains tax, is sort of the minimum tax possible in really the most efficient manner possible. And how we do that, like what I do on a daily basis is I'm educating people. So I call it edutainment, a little bit of education, a lot of education, a little bit of entertainment. We do that on our YouTube page. We've got a YouTube page, Cunningham Legal. So if you Google YouTube and go to Cunningham, put YouTube and Cunningham Legal in there, it pops up. And this kind of started when COVID hit. We just kind of started talking. It was my son. We were all kind of like everyone else, right? My adult children came back home when COVID started, and Dad's like, hey, my son Nick says, hey, Dad, just get a microphone and start talking about all this stuff that's in your head. So I started doing that. And then what happened?
And there's a lot in that head, by the way.
Yeah, well, in 2020, what happened is Prop 19 passed. Now, California, for those of you in California that own real estate, you know about Prop 13 because it keeps your property taxes at 1% of their base year value. What does that mean? Well, when a property trades hands, it's assessed at 1% of its market value. Those taxes can only go up 2%. The problem, well, not problem, real estate's been going up on average 6% over the last 45 years. So people who who've held property for a long time, their property taxes might be, 1% of a million, but the property's worth 5 million. So they're getting basically an 80% discount on their taxes. We used to be able to transfer that to the next generation, within certain limitations. Now that's pretty much gone. People are losing their minds. They're really upset. And so that we started talking about that. And then that really sort of grew our YouTube presence. And a lot of people, I get the feedback I get. We did a webinar in our Pasadena office last Friday, and somebody said, Jim, I really appreciate you, all this information. And I will tell you, many lawyers who say they do estate planning don't know enough to actually do estate planning. Now, estate planning is done only by 7% of lawyers in California. So they're 93%. So 93% of lawyers walking out there really don't know anything about estate planning. The 7% that do practice in estate planning, I will tell you, if you're listening to this or watching it, a lot of those people simply are not delivering the quality estate plan that many people don't know they want. But once they find out, and this is why education is so powerful, once they find out, they're like, yeah, I want that. I want to protect what I've taken a lifetime to accumulate from the government, from future ex-sons-in-law and future ex-daughters-in-law. That's a big one, right? So the probability of getting divorced in California is what? 50%.
Welcome to the state. Hey,
Right.
let's take a half step back, because
Yeah.
you're a motorboat. I gotta kind of rein you in a little bit occasionally, because again, you really target on some things. But I want to go back to the theme of the mission statement, okay? And one of the things you hit on the property tax was that California is unique, and I wrote a list on some unique things. California, the first problem we have is that our wealth is much greater than almost every other state. Okay.
Yeah.
And so we have to, everybody has to earn more, they're worth more. And when you compile that with the regulations, and the problem solving gets much more difficult. Okay. And so you, again, all your offices are in California, you're California centric. Everything you write about is about California. Okay. And you're right. Your website is more robust than any of I've seen, even mine. And we have an LMS, learning management system, for people to go get educated on things. But so let's hone in on the wealth, and then let's try to dissect why some of the things are different. And you already hit on Prop 13. Okay. And but what I want to talk about is when you have more wealth, Jim, okay, you like I've been sharing in previous podcasts, you create this generational opportunity or failure, as it were. Okay. So what you're doing is you're trying to accumulate for your lifetime, and then it becomes that much more difficult to pass it on to the next gen with all the rules and regs, because of the amount of money you're talking about. Okay. Does that seem fair?
Well, yeah, I mean, and it actually is, there's more to it than that. I mean, California is this, I was born in California, and I was born in San Diego. San Diego's gorgeous. People want to come to San Diego from all over the world. I live in Sacramento and Marin County. Sacramento, a lot of people love it. It's not exactly a destination, right? Not exactly, but it's its own thing. But you go to Marin County or the Bay Area, the natural beauty of California, the Sierra Nevada mountains, that's a draw. The smartest people in tech on the planet come to California. The top people in entertainment, film, and television come to California. Those are two massive industries. California is a very high rent district. This is how I look at California, like a high rent district. You have to pay a lot of money to live here. And you're also earning a lot of money. And then when people say, I want to get off the bus, I want to do something else, I don't want to have to earn $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year or more just to simply exist in California, a lot of those people tap out and they move to other states. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that when that person leaves, another person's coming in. And you hear this thing about all the U-Hauls, like there's a net exodus of U-Hauls. Well, the people moving into California, I'm not sure they're bringing a U-Haul. They might be richer, so they're not hauling their own stuff. They might be coming in from foreign countries. And what we see in California is a lot of people, 40% of Californians were not born in the United States. Get your head around that. That's 16 million people. That is a really good thing. Now, a lot of people hear that and they go, well, that's what's wrong in America. I think it's the total opposite. That's what's great about California, and especially in the Bay Area in Northern California, to a lesser extent Los Angeles, but you still get what I see in practice, because we have offices in Northern and Southern California. The Bay Area is a magnet for people from all over the world. And if you don't think that people in China with money don't want to leave, meaning that people with money in China want to get at least some of their money out, the people in India want to get their money out, the people all over the world, and many of them want to come to California.
Yep. And so there is that draw. That draw is creating wealth. But again, we have to discuss it as it's creating an industry, it's creating an environment, it's creating success that we call California. Now, when we get to your world, again, I have to hyper focus in on your world, estate planning, and it's holistic. It's all encompassing. Okay, what we do is pretty. I mean, you and I work a lot on California private retirement plans, right? And that's very specific. And provides a certain set of benefits for a certain market. It doesn't solve everybody's problem. But one of the things that I noticed when talking with you is that when you're doing planning, you never, okay, and audience, Jim has done my estate plan, okay? Never is it ever, hey, here's a plan, and we're going to plan on spending it all during your lifetime. It is always a legacy plan, multi-generational. And so one of the problems that you have there is you're trying to retain this wealth with all this rule book, both federal and state. And it's way more than the risk and the tax that I have to deal with. I'm a subset of your world, right? And so when you're not outright distributing things, there's this leftover. Okay. And one of the most critical things I've seen is the epic failure of people that don't have a plan and they're trying to leave it to their next gen, and it gets slaughtered. And this is my family story, but from decades ago. But so they end up being these trustees for their own estates, and they're getting demolished. And so what I want to talk about, the first step, okay, Jim, is when you're doing an estate plan, you need to know that you have to have a guide. Okay. We're administrators during lifetime for private retirement plans, but when somebody dies, this whole estate and all the stuff I had to do for my family for a decade comes on you. And there's no way that these people are going to even understand how to start to do it and the years and years it takes. So let's talk about administration of an estate for transferring wealth.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because my book, Savvy Estate Planning, shameless plug, Savvy Estate Planning, top seller, what you need to know before you hire the right lawyer. We go into a lot of depth on just these issues. So, when you think about it, what is the likelihood that what you take a lifetime to accumulate on this earth, when you leave this earth, and that's not always when people are transferring wealth, when you leave this earth, your stuff stays here. And we cover that in the book. The Vikings tried to take their stuff with them on the burning ship, and the pharaohs buried it in the pyramids. To this point, we don't know if that worked or not. Probably didn't. At least that's what the evidence shows. But who knows? I guess we'll find out. We all find out, right? Someday. But it's very important who you pick as your successor trustee. Now, I will tell you, if your estate is very simple, if you have a house and a bank account, there's a level of complexity there, but it's not super complex. If you have multiple businesses and multiple partnership interests and a taxable estate, certainly if your estate is over $13 million, and that's getting cut in half in 2026. But if your estate's over $13 million, there's added complexity in there. So who you pick as trustee, can this person get the job done? Do they have the bandwidth? Do they have the time to get the job done? That's one consideration. The second consideration that I will tell you, Ray, and if lawyers are listening to this, you really need to brush up on income taxation. I will tell you, income taxation is another subspecialty in law. Estate planning attorneys typically ignore, largely speaking, income taxes. Now, I will tell you, as a taxpayer, like we're all taxpayers, and if you're listening to this or watching it, you're probably a taxpayer too, meaning you got to send money to the state and federal government every year. I don't like doing that. I want to send the least possible. I don't want to send a penny more. I don't donate to that $3 presidential campaign fund. I think the government's got enough money. We need to keep that down as low as possible. And lawyers, estate planning lawyers, don't pay attention to this. This is where you come in. This is where I come in. We work with other professionals to keep that income tax bill lower, which very few lawyers are even thinking about. Now, What does this have to do with trusts? If you have an irrevocable trust, now a living trust is like a bucket. It's a bucket with a handle. The trustee holds onto the handle. You put your stocks, your bonds, your mutual funds, your house, your investment properties, whatever it is, LLC interest, partnership interest, that goes in a bucket. IRAs, 401ks, annuities stay outside of the bucket. Those pass by beneficiary designation. But when you stop serving as trustee, you let go of that handle, somebody else picks up that bucket. That typically is when that trust becomes irrevocable. Now, here's the kicker. If that is a California resident, it subjects all of that income that comes into the trust that is not distributed to beneficiaries, it subjects it to California income tax. If there are two trustees, it subjects half the income to California income tax, maybe if you have a Nevada co-trustee. So two issues here. One, if you have an estate that is going to continue on after you pass away. So for many of our clients, they set up dynasty trusts. I know dynasty trust can go along for generations and never be taxed again if it's done in the right jurisdiction for estate taxes. You also have what we call inheritance protection trusts. So these are designed to protect an inheritance. And this is kind of how we draft a lot of these in our firm. But the way it's designed is if a person receives an inheritance, if that person gets divorced, it is designed to protect that from a 50-50 division of community property. So keep half of it from being lost in divorce. It is best if you're not the trustee. So maybe you have someone else's trustee. We like Nevada. We like Nevada as a jurisdiction because it's next door to California. It's a short flight, and income that is not distributed in that Nevada trust, okay, if you're inheriting property, income that's not distributed is not taxed at that time under California law.
Well,
Now,
let's talk about something
later, maybe, but
let's talk about something even more critical. What people don't know is again, this is a control thing, and they don't know that they, as a trustee or executor, are totally at risk of the estate if something happens. Yeah. And they're the ones that are going to get sued, and their estate's going to get sued if a beneficiary is not satisfied. And so if they don't have planning, what do you think is going to happen? Beneficiaries aren't going to be satisfied. And so again, what we get, is we get a lot of calls of, hey, this happened, mom or dad died, or somebody died, or my brother died, and I'm in charge because I thought it'd be a good idea because I love them. And I don't know what I'm doing. And all of a sudden this big wave of shock effects coming at them, let alone the fact that, my cousins aren't happy. I had a crazy cousin. Okay. She thought that there was an international airport on my grandparents' estate and wanted it. So back to you is, again, this goes back with the theme of everything that I've been doing in the podcast since day one, is do not procrastinate on these things. And you got to know what you need to know what you need to know. And the first thing, Jim, is, and I want you to talk about this. Okay. Yeah. If you're a trustee for your families or anybody in your family's estate, you need to think twice about that warning shot. Can you
trust. Okay. So there's a lot of layers to this. Number one, a trustee is 100% liable. What does that mean? There's stuff you must do. If you don't do it, then you're liable. Well, most people look at me and they go, well, Jim, that's pretty easy. The trust tells me what to do and I'll just follow the terms of the trust. Okay, great. You're liable for what the trust says. You are liable if the investments go down. So without proper administration of a trust, working with a lawyer, if one stock drops, if NVIDIA, which is up as we record this right now, if that drops 50%, guess what? You're personally liable for the drop in the price of that stock. And people go, well, wait a minute, how can I be liable for that? Well, you can. Working with a lawyer is you can shield yourself from that liability. So number one, you're liable for all the stuff that you ought to be doing, right? That's written down. Secondly, you're liable for all the stuff that you must do that is not contained in the trust. So this is very important. Trustees must follow the terms of the trust as written in the trust. There are also other things that the trustee must do that are written into the California Probate Code. Now you may say, why am I mentioning probate with trust? Because the California Probate Code has all the trust laws in it. Kind of confusing. California Probate Code says trustees have to do this a whole bunch of stuff that is not even mentioned, Ray, not even mentioned in the trust. And if you try and figure this out for yourself, as Abraham Lincoln said, if you represent yourself, you have a fool for a client. Hence, if you represent yourself, you're a fool. That's what that means. So there's a bunch of stuff that you need to do that's not written in the trust, that's contained in the probate code. Then we have case law. These are rules that judges come up with that are not in the trust. They're not in the probate code. They're case law. And then there's something else called dicta. What is dicta? Dicta is, I'm sorry, not dicta, not dicta. It is doctrine. So
Okay.
doctrine. Okay. So what is doctrine? Doctrine is, it doesn't quite say this in the cases. It doesn't quite say this in the statutes, but we're going to invent this thing called doctrine and we're going to follow it. So you've got
We, as in the legal industry.
we as in the judge who's going to find that you owe money as a trustee because you did or didn't do something. So you have to follow the terms of the trust. You have to follow the probate code. You have to follow case law. You have to follow judicial doctrine. That's hard for certified specialists in estate planning like me.
Right.
That's hard for people who really know their stuff, because sometimes you see a trust and you're like, wow, I got to think about this. What should we do in this case? What must we do? What should we do? It's not always clear. And if you do get that jerk brother or that jerk cousin or whatever it is, you know, Bobby got
There's
the
always one
red
of those.
bicycle in 1962 and is still pissed off.
Yeah.
You're going to have a problem, even if you think you're doing it right.
Yeah.
that's
And listen, we're not
Pretty
telling
clear.
people that, you know, it's not that you don't love somebody. Okay. And this is where I find this crazy, you know, nuances. These, you know, well, I got to do it because I love them, but you know, you don't need to put yourself at risk. Okay. I had an army of people to resolve my grandparents' estate, and
Yep.
because I didn't know what was going on, and you have to have the specialist. And luckily, we dug out, but at a high cost. So, anyways, the bottom line here, without going too far, is really if you're a client and you're thinking about, hey, I want to go and have my brother be my trustee, okay, you better think about it. Okay. And you better,
and also picking the right lawyer. I got to tell you something. Picking the right lawyer is really important. In our law firm, when people call in and they say, hey, I need to know, do I need to do anything? Like, what do I need to do in this estate? Because people, you know, I can't tell somebody if they say, hey, my parents died with a living trust. What do I need to do? Well, I need to talk to you because I need to figure out, because a lot of it's driven by the assets. What assets are in there? Who are the beneficiaries? What does the trust say? And that kind of defines the scope, because some people, frankly, you know, if mom dies with $5,000 in the bank, I don't think you need a lawyer, right? I mean, if you're like a sole beneficiary, if it's just, I'm an only child, mom died, there's 5,000 in the bank, there's not a lot of lawyering to do there. And so what we do is we do an initial consult with people. Yes, it is paid. They do pay us money. But the thing with that initial consult is we carve out enough time to look at the documents, look at the assets, have a conversation with the decision makers, the stakeholders, and then arrive at a recommendation. Do you need a lawyer? Do you need a fancy lawyer, or can you get by with a basic lawyer? But here's one thing I will tell you. You don't know what you don't know. And a lot of lawyers do not do an adequate job when it comes to trust administration. Now, by trust administration, I mean when somebody dies or becomes incapacitated, and that person who created the trust is no longer the trustee. That's trust administration. You don't know what you're supposed to do. And unless you go to an expert lawyer or a savvy lawyer, that lawyer's not going to know either. And just because you get advice doesn't mean it's good, and doesn't mean it's going to shield you from liability as a trustee. So if you get bad advice as a trustee, guess what? You're still liable. Can you blame the lawyer? Good luck with that.
Yeah. And so I'm going to cherry pick some of these examples. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to kill a bunch of birds with one stone. So we're going to look at why the uniqueness of California, and why California has some different laws. Okay. And in uniqueness, and then couple that with, these are things that, again, you don't want to be messing with. Okay. Unless you have a guard dog, you know, providing oversight. And so the first thing we're going to do is, you know, you're talking about, okay, if somebody dies and they have $5,000 in the bank, I really don't see a lot of that. In most cases, almost everybody has a piece of property that somebody bought. Okay. Whether they inherited it or whether a bunch of people bought it or whatever. And there's one piece of property, and then the will says, oh, they get the property and the other sibling gets the cash, and now they're at odds and all this stuff. Okay. But let's talk about property. Okay. Because real estate's really different in California than anywhere else. Okay. And so, Jim, let's encapsulate this. I'm going to pick on three different things. The first one being real estate. And we're going to separate out investment real estate from primary residence, because I want to talk about primary residence specifically. Okay. So first, let's go to real estate investment. Okay. We have to talk about Prop 13. Okay. That you mentioned earlier. Okay. Which is, California's different than the other states in a favorable way. We want to lock in the 1%. Okay.
Right.
Okay. But you can blow that quite easily. So let's talk about Prop 13. And then I'd like you to segue into Prop 19 that came out a couple of years ago, 2020, right? I think.
Yeah.
and what they were trying to do there for estate planning, specifically for transition planning. So go.
Yes. So let me explain again. Prop 13 says that whenever there's a change in ownership, and a change in ownership is on a sale, if you sell me a piece of property, Ray, that's a change in ownership. Whenever there's a death, that's a change in ownership. And this is the one that catches people by surprise. Death is change in ownership. If more than 50% of an LLC interest, so if there are two people own a property and one person buys out the other one, that's a change in ownership. All right. So if you have an LLC, that's you interacting with the Board of Equalization, not your local assessor. So is there a change in ownership? If there's a change in ownership, the property is reassessed at its fair market value. The taxes are capped at 1%. And you might say, well, Jim, my taxes are more than 1%. It's because there are extra parcel taxes that are flat rate taxes, and then extra what we call ad valorem taxes that are passed by 2/3 of the voters in that tax district. So in some jurisdictions in California, it's closer to 1%. In other jurisdictions, it can be as high as 2 or 3%. It just depends on what it depends on the assessed value of the property and the parcel taxes. So
is that county driven?
That's county and tax district driven. So even within, like, for
okay.
example, in San Francisco County, we'll see, some taxes are 1.3, some are 1.1. It just depends on what's passed in that particular jurisdiction.
Okay.
So you've got a fairly complex tax system, but I will say across the board, fairly low. That's Prop 13. Well, it used to be that a parent could give, sell, or when that parent passes away, transfer that property to a child. And that assessed value, that low assessed value, that only goes up 2% a year, even though property's gone up 6% a year. That assessed value only goes up 2% a year, not even keeping up with inflation, right, over the last 40 years. That property passes to the child. It is reassessed as of the market value at that date. So the assessor, figures out, well, that's the market value. We're going to reassess you. So we'll send a supplemental unsecured bill. Here's a little bit of a practice tip. If mom and dad die and you list the property for sale and sell it, and you might sell it 10 or 11 months later, you as trustee are likely going to get a supplemental unsecured bill, meaning you owe it personally, okay? You're going to get a supplemental unsecured bill for the difference between the value of the property as of the date of death of mom and dad or the survivor of them, and then, when you sell it. It takes about 11 months. And right now it's maybe taking 1.5 years in LA County to get your supplemental assessment. So what can happen is if you make a distribution of assets out of the trust as trustee, you said, great, we're going to sell the house, we're going to distribute everything. And then when you get that $25,000 bill coming in, you go back to the beneficiaries to get the money. Unless you have a refunding agreement, you are statutorily barred from getting money back from the beneficiaries. You're going to have to suck it up and pay it yourself. That's one example of personal liability. So another one is, is there a parent-to-child reassessment exclusion? Yes, it applies to the primary residence, meaning mom and dad have to live there, right, as of the date of death. Now, can you be in a nursing home and live there? Yes, if you intend to return to the home. You just can't rent it out. There's a lot of these little rules in there. So mom and dad live in the house. Mom and dad die. Maybe there are 2 kids. One kid says, I want the property. Hey, sister, I'll buy you out of the property. Half that property is going to get reassessed, right? If the recipient child puts money in, this is a crazy rule. The trust has to go out and borrow money, right? If there's not enough liquidity. So there's a workaround, but it requires going out to a third-party lender. That's called buying out a sibling. We cover that on our website, on our YouTube page. So if that's you, I would go to our YouTube page and, Google or click in how to buy out a sibling. We have a whole webinar on that walks you through. If you're a lawyer, that's actually a really good quick explanation, by the way, a non-technical explanation. So you can help out your client as well. So there's buying out a sibling. Then the big one, that's if it's a home and that kid has to move in within a year, has to file the BOE 19P, which is a form, right? It's a 4-page form. You have to file that within 2 years. So a lot of stuff has to happen. What about the family farm? So the family farm, this is a huge exception. The family farm says if it goes from parent to child, it is $1 million per parcel exemption. What does that mean? That means as long as that parcel is not worth more than $1 million, it's not going to get reassessed. As long as the difference between the assessed value and the market value isn't more than $1 million, it won't be reassessed. By the way, that parent to child reassessment exclusion is capped at $1 million, meaning if mom's property is assessed at $200,000 and it's worth $1 million, there's no reassessment. If mom's house is assessed at $200,000 and it's worth $2 million, $1.2 million avoids reassessment, but that $800,000 gets reassessed. So your property tax bill is going to go up, 4x, 5x, whatever it is.
Right.
Um,
And your education, the audience should know, is really to help them know that there's these landmines, this minefield.
Yeah.
Okay. And then help them know, okay, I can't just go and pretend I'm going to get from point A to point Z without maybe hitting one of those landmines. So this is decision-making stuff, but they really shouldn't be doing this themselves. And an audience, I know there's a lot of do-it-yourselfers, but I'm going to tell you, okay, Jim, you and I do a lot of private retirement plans, California private retirement plans. Okay. A lot of them have real estate that's owned in LLC. We don't even do the transfers, okay, in the counties. Okay. We have an assessor's officer that makes sure that they go, because it is complex, and every county has a process and procedure, okay, depending on where the property is.
Yeah.
And if you husband and wife, community property spouse have it, and then they put it in an LLC, was it done right? Can they get into the private retirement trust for the LLC member interest into the trust? Is that done right? And then if something's not done right, and then all of a sudden you get this notice from the assessor's office that you've triggered a reassessment, it is 50 times more difficult to try to convince them that you were trying to do something and you did the wrong paperwork, right? Than doing it right the first place.
Not do it yourself. When you combine property going from one person to another with an LLC and real estate, you really need to know what you're doing, because you can easily step in it. And this is important, Ray, for the people who have LLCs, property and LLCs. If you screw up, meaning if you trigger a change in ownership and you don't do anything for 20 years, everything sees the light of day. It will come out and you will have a massive retroactive tax bill. We see this with clients coming in. And then I talk to other lawyers that say, well, we'll just do this, or CPAs and lawyers, we'll do this and we just won't tell the Board of Equalization. I'm like, well, you can't not tell them, because they will find out one day. All right. It's the assessor's job. The assessor's out there sniffing around this stuff, right? The recorder's office. They're all reporting to each other. And and
it might
can't avoid
it might be
That's
at death that it gets found out, and that just compiles the exacerbation of the transfer of the state. And listen, one of the attorneys, one of your peers, is going to come on, and he's in contract law, but he's dealing with his mom passing, and it is not a time to be thinking about doing this stuff. Okay, you're emotionally, it was tough for me. It was really tough to try to sit there and emotionally deal with things. And it's being brought up every day because you're getting hammered by bad guys every day. And it's just draining. So,
yeah. And one thing, if you're listening to this or watching it and you're involved, you have a family or loved one or whatever it is with a large estate. What I'm saying is a taxable estate. I was talking recently with a client with a very large estate. Their death tax bill is $50 million. And the clients are elderly. There's some stuff we can do, but basically this is about managing liquidity. Those taxes are due 9 months after death. A $50 million check is written 9 months after death. It is a 5% penalty per month if you do not pay the taxes.
Yeah,
that's $2.5 million a month, up to $25 million. Get your head around that. So if you have a large estate and you screw this up, and I will tell you, it gets screwed up all the time. People, they don't know. They go, well, I just won't say anything. We'll just kind of, keep this between ourselves. The problem is, if you don't pay attention to this stuff, you do need these advisors, the lawyers, the CPAs, the financial advisors. And then if you haven't reported everything, the lawyers and financial advisors and CPAs, you go, wait a minute, we're not going to help you until this is cleared up. So you kind of end up in a dead end. So you really do need to pay attention to this.
Yeah, we're not in the business of taking on client risk. Okay. And that's like when we're doing with, asset protection using a private retirement plan, and they say, I'm being sued right now. Well, sorry, we don't take that, because why would we absorb your risk that you incurred and created? That's not our job as a professional.
Let me make this clear. What we're talking about here, the context of asset protection that I'm talking about in the estate planning context in this, in this webinar, in this podcast, is when somebody dies or makes a gift and it goes to another person. Okay. Right. So you can have a structure, and we call it a dole it out trust. We call it an asset protection, dole it out trust and inheritance protection trust. We call it a special needs trust. So if you have a loved one with special needs, maybe you have a son or a daughter or grandson or granddaughter who has special needs. And what that means is that person likely is on supplemental security income. That person, or SSI, that person needs asset protection, because if they have more than $2,000 in their bank account at the end of the month, they lose Medicare, Medicaid, they may lose Medicaid, and they very well may be kicked out of the regional center as something that they may need. So a lot of people want to live independently if they can, and they want to live a full life. And if you don't have these other social services, it can be really tough. So special needs planning is an asset protection vehicle.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to talk about. Shifting from the real estate, from investment real estate, let's talk now about a primary residence, because I actually texted you last week of a client of mine that has a substantial house in Los Angeles, and the topic of mansion tax came up. So let's talk about that and what we do. That I lean on you for mostly. And we used to do some equity stripping on houses with, but now the value is so much that we really don't do that much.
Yeah.
Okay. And so this involves, again, an LLC with a primary residence. Well, okay, how does that work? And a lot of people haven't even heard of this. So let's start with the mansion tax problem.
Yeah, mansion tax, basically it's a tax on real estate over a certain nominal price. So San Francisco has it, San Jose has it. It's a documentary transfer tax, and now Los Angeles has it. It's for all real property. So this is something to understand. This is not a mansion tax. This is a low-income housing tax. It is a multifamily tax. It's an apartment tax. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, those rich people can pay, they can. I mean, the reality is they can. But when a $25 million apartment building changes hands and they have to pay this extra tax, guess who ends up paying that? It's the people who rent the apartments in the building, because this money doesn't come from nowhere. So it is a tax on anyone who has use of these properties over a certain dollar amount. Now, is there a way to avoid it? Not really. Can you game the system? Maybe a little bit. Can you use a combination of LLCs and buying LLC units? Here's the problem with that. There's something called the step transaction doctrine. This is very important to understand. This applies to taxation. If A equals B and B equals C,
A equals C.
A equals C, but then the step transaction doctrine says, well, no, you can't do that. We're gonna tax that transaction. So I think trying to evade the mansion tax, could you? Maybe. It's a lot, I think, if you're paying it. In the scheme of things, I mean, I'm not aware really of any meaningful way around it. Ray, are you?
Well, no, again, there's, estate planning, transition planning, charitable planning. I mean, there's a whole slew of different things, but it again depends on what you're trying to do. Most people, though, the problem is I still want to live in it. I want to enjoy it. And that conflicts.
Yeah. So the LLC. So here's the thing. A lot of lawyers will say, if you put a personal use asset in an LLC, it is not a business. There's no business use case for it. That being said, theoretically, you could put your property in an LLC and have a rental agreement and rent it from the LLC. But like the governor, my understanding is Gavin Newsom lives in a house owned by an LLC. Whether he owns it or not, I really don't know. That's his residence in Sacramento. So if it's good enough for the governor, maybe it's good enough for everyone. But you will. So if you're listening to this or watching this and you talk to lawyers, there are a camp of lawyers who say it's okay to put a personal use asset into an LLC. There's another camp who say it's not. Okay. So because it's a personal use, you could do other things. A really great strategy, frankly, is a qualified personal residence trust. Right. So this is qualified in the sense that it's qualified under the tax code. So here's the idea. You cannot give away something and keep using it. So this is like the Rockefeller tax. Let's say the Rockefellers have a beachfront home in Newport Beach, and it's a $50 million home. And they say, we're going to give this to our kids, but we're going to keep using it. So under Internal Revenue Code Section 2036A, the government says, no, if you give something away and keep using it, it's still in your estate. Nice try, Rockefellers. Not going to happen. A qualified personal residence trust says you can give away your property, right, and still live in it for a term of years. At the end of that term of the years, you are then paying rent because you no longer own the property. That to me is because now that ownership passes to the next generation, that is a very effective asset protection strategy. Okay. Because as the tenant now, right, maybe you do a 3-year term. on a qualified personal residence trust. Now, the downside is you don't own that asset anymore. It's gone to the next generation. The upside is you're able to pay rent, not incur an income tax because it's what we call a grantor trust, which we cover in other materials, but you're able to pay rent and that rent goes to the next generation tax-free. So if you're helping your kids out anyway, and this is something I did want to discuss, Ray, is a lot of my clients have grandkids and it's really expensive to live in California. And if you're wealthy, you're probably living in a nice area and you might want to actually see your grandkids more than 3 times a year. So that means your kids might have to buy a property. So Marin County, which is where you're from, I think the average home price is like 1.9 million. Well, basically, no one can afford 1.9 million, but that's a big mortgage, right? Especially in a higher interest rate environment. So if you live in Marin County and your daughter's a school teacher and your son-in-law is a police officer, they're not going to be able to buy a house in Marin County without some help. And so we covered this in another webinar, is how to help a child buy a home. So that is a wealth transfer strategy. How do you protect that? How do you protect that from divorce? How do you protect it from creditors? There's all sorts of planning you can do. The other thing is you don't want to spoil your kids. That's a whole other topic is, I don't want to leave my kids so much that they're going to be ruined. And there are ways you can help your children without them being ruined, as it were.
Right. Yep. And that's basically turning on the spigot, using trust distributions and empowering them to learn how to budget and things like that over time. We don't have a ton more time. So there is one other critical mass thing that I want to embed in here, and that's for the small business owner community. And on top of everything else, and again, not to freak everybody else out, but these are just considerations that are unique to California. California business tends to be worth a lot more in California than any other state, right? And so again, the problem we see is that, let alone the estate planning, a business is part of the estate, and that complexes things even more. And very rarely do we see the preparation for that transition. Buy-sell agreements, okay, which is, transfer of the stock or the member interest, to the kids if they're working in the business, to a key person or whatever. But that is another component that adds to this that should be considered to safely get that business so it's not disrupted. Again, I had to personally deal with disruption in the business, and it's called a fire sale. We had to sell assets, including a house in Tahoe, to pay not only estate tax, to pay creditors and get the value squeezed as much out as we could. So can you just kind of chime in on that?
Yeah. So right out of the gate, somebody who has an SBA loan, Small Business Administration, under many of those loan agreements, death is an event that causes acceleration of the note being due. So if you have an EIDL loan, if you've got another type of SBA loan, when that guarantor dies, many times that note is due in full. Okay, so death is death is a default, if you will. So that is due. So it's very important. So from a liquidity standpoint. Secondly, is making sure you have continuity with your business. So it is as basic as, if you say, well, it's just me and 2 employees, who's going to make payroll if you get hit by an ice cream truck and don't die, or get hit by a beer truck, whatever truck you prefer, right? Let's say you don't die. You got to still have to make payroll. And if you die, certainly you've got to make payroll. What about your leases and other obligations? Is there maybe a competitor who would take over your business, right? Maybe you make a deal with a competitor. Maybe it's an internal succession, whatever it is good to have a plan, something off the shelf, ready to go. When COVID hit about a month before, we have offices in multiple locations in California. And I asked our leadership team, hey, if there's a big earthquake, like we happened in 94, 89, what's our plan? They're like, gee, we don't have a plan. So we came up with a plan. Guess what? When COVID hit, that was our plan. So everyone took their stuff home and we had continuity. So it depends on the business. Here's another thing, Ray, that you and I see a lot. Business owners, oftentimes they say, you know what? I'm not going to have a big 401k or IRA because that I can get a higher rate of return on my personal assets. I'm not going to invest in real estate because that money I would use as a down payment, and the credit I would have to take out to buy that property, it's better suited if I put that in my business. So what we find, we find concentrations when it comes to people. Now, if your concentration happens to be marketable securities and you have an estate tax liability, you sell some stock and you pay the taxes. Not, it sucks, but it's not disruptive. All right. You just pick up, hey, broker, sell the stock, pay the taxes. If it's real estate, It's a bit of a fire sale. It could be hard. We're in a weird market now with office. So if you have a lot of office buildings, it might be, you might be squeezed, you might be pinched a little bit. So it'd be hard to liquidate those properties. But again, there's a market for real estate. When you're a business owner, think about it. If you had to sell your business, how long would that take? Death taxes are due 9 months after date of death. Are you kind of the
I know
reason
that.
the business exists, right? Are you the reason the business exists? If you're not here, will that business even really be worth anything? And then, are you going to sell to an outside person? Are you going to sell to an inside person? Are you going to slowly close the business, right? And just kind of let it die out, like collect your accounts and sell off your equipment and essentially an asset sale. So these are some things I think as a business owner, certainly if you're married, you owe it to your spouse, just, probably ethically, unless you really hate your spouse. Certainly if you have kids, you probably owe it to your kids as well. And also I will just say this
50%
about
rate divorce rate.
I'll say this about running a business. If you're a business owner, you're going to understand what I'm saying. I think business owners should run their business as if they're going to sell it. You need to run a tight ship. Okay. You need to have solid financials. You need to know where you're at. And if that's not you, if you're like, well, it's a lifestyle business, I'm not really paying attention to it. I think that really compromises the ability to frankly get rid of it if you need to, if somebody, if you were to pass away. Certainly, having this buy sell in place really helps. That's sort of next level business planning. And I think a lot of people never get to it.
Let's stop here because Bill has probably blown his brains out by now. Okay. And I want the audience to hear this on estate planning. And again, it's because I'm in this business because of my family situation. I vowed never to let this happen to anybody. I warn people. And the reason that we're being very aggressive with all this stuff and probably upsetting a lot of people and freaking them out, and they're going to stare at the ceiling fan, it's because there is very little people that do understand this. And so I wanted to bring Jim on because you are now seeing the spectrum of thought that needs to go into this stuff. And I promised resources, California Wealth Warriors. Okay. And as you said, there's not a lot of people that do this out there. I hang out with those that do, my buddy Jim. Okay. Yep. And you again have great ability to do education and empower people, but they've got to get to these resources or, again, we know it's going to be a catastrophe. So there are solutions. Okay. Takes investment, takes time. Okay. You need to pause your business life, and that's tough. I know. And you need to have conversation with people, and you need to pull together these resources. Again, Jim is just one of many. Jim, we need to have kind of a mission statement conclusion, and then we need to make sure that our audience is able to get to you. They always can through me. We have everything from our California Private Retirement Plan calculator on your website, to mutual testimonials and things like that. So Jim, why don't you conclude and wrap it up, and then we'll have Bill do the ultimate wrap up.
Well, if for more information, you can reach out to our website, www.cunninghamlegal.com. You can go on YouTube and put in the search bar Cunningham Legal, and you'll see our YouTube there. But really, we're a law firm that helps people find peace of mind through estate and income tax planning that minimizes overall taxes and promotes the creation, preservation, and growth of multi-generational wealth. That gives people peace of mind. That's fundamentally what we're in the business of, because when you leave this earth, you're leaving all your stuff behind. You're leaving all the people you love behind. And if you're someone who wants peace of mind, knowing that things are in order, then do estate planning, whether it's with us or another, able firm. But I will say, Ray and Bill, the longer I do this, the more I realize that the people you think, wow, they seem like they know what they're doing. When you kind of peel the onion, you're like, wow. So choose well. I mean, there are, other than me, there are people out there, right? But I will say a lot of people who are saying that they do this really are doing a substandard job, and you really just can't, it's hard to discern that, right, as a consumer.
Yeah. And I'm giving you credit that, your growth pattern is interesting, because what you've been doing is you've been evaluating maybe some areas that, need attention and to be shored up. And then you find those firms, and then you roll them up into your company, and that fills that void. So you got a lot of holistic people. You have a young crew that's got some growth, even though you're the leader. and the brain behind the, the curtain. So I appreciate you, appreciate our,
Thank you.
I guess we're probably over 10 years now knowing each other or something like that. But it's been a great haul, and it's going to be a longer great haul. Jim's going to be, doing all his education. I'm going to be doing California Wealth Warriors. And Bill, again, there's a danger here in that we have to kind of scare people and let them know the reality so that we can save them. Okay. And that's a hard pill to swallow, but it is what it is. And if you want to be saved, you need to know where the landmines are. Okay.
Well, that is true. In every episode, Ray, you give people knowledge that they need to make plans, to do something about it. And I just would add that, you talk about there are people being freaked out and maybe laying on their bed and staring up at the ceiling fan. Don't stare at the fan and do nothing. The tools are here for you. They've been laid out for you. You can do something, but you have to do it. And Ray, for those people who are interested in what you're doing, how do they get a hold of you? How do they have a conversation with you, and how do they join you in this fight?
Yep. I've been getting a lot of emails from this podcast already. So ray@trust-cfo.com is my email. I'm more than happy to take those in. What I've been doing, I just did one a couple of minutes before this podcast, is somebody asked for something very specific regarding a different type of contract. And I connected him with the person that I think was going to best be a fit. And so, playing that matchmaker is one thing. Jim, I really do have him as kind of that first pinpoint in terms of estate planning, asking questions. And I ask him a lot of questions that I don't know the answer to. And there's just too much information. So if you need anything, please reach out to me. If it's not us, and Jim's the same way. If we can't help you, we know a lot of people. We will surely get you to somebody that We hang out in this little club, and we really rely on each other. And all the previous people I had on the podcast, Jim knows Jeff Verdon, in the asset protection world, right? And so, et cetera, et cetera. You'll find that we all need each other and lean on each other. So that's what Californians should be doing for each other too. Let's not sit there and bash each other. Let's be that takes a village, right? And that's how we're going to survive. All right.
Groups.
Well, we're off to the next fun thing. Thanks, Jim, so much. Really appreciate you and our friendship.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Yep, groups. They're a good thing. Better than staying out there all by yourself, not knowing quite what to do. Another thing you can do that's really, really easy if you're listening to this podcast for the first time is hit subscribe. That way you won't miss another episode of this podcast. Whenever Ray drops one, you will be notified. We'll also ask you that if you are in California and you know other Californians and you like this podcast, let them know. Get the word out about the podcast. Thanks so much for listening. On behalf of Ray and everybody at the California Wealth Warriors, I'm Bill Tucker, thanking you for listening and reminding you that you can go out today and make it a great day. Or not.
It's your choice.
It's your choice. Amen, Ray. It's your choice. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for listening.